ideas now. Yes. Okay.
So we've got a couple of questions.
I'm going to go.
Right. So it could be questions or comments. It doesn't have to be questions.
Okay. Go. Lee.
So I'm quite interested in, and a bit inspired by this whole context of scientific and social, and also the widening access and widening participation in this. So if we wanted to get the whole spectrum of society doing something with a bigger vision of them actually being better environmental citizens, what's your, I don't know if you have a vision or an idea about how we get to do something that's small, but still inspire them enough to make sure that they feel that they're contributing to something, but it's also doable and gets them engaged.
So
You've gone beyond that.
The first thing I'd say is that I think climate change is kind of a middle-class problem. So actually, it's really important to, because we're the ones that are travelling all over the world. We can afford to buy lots of technology again and again without thinking about it. And so actually, on this project, it's really important to engage those people, but to kind of flip in their minds about how they engage others. So kind of the basic premise for some of the communities that we might get involved might be not about sustainability, but being able to working in those frugal. There's a lot that we can learn, I think, from people who don't have very much in how they do what they do and how they're resilient. And so part of it is being open to learning from others who we might not perceive as being experts, but are experts by experience. So kind of a very simple example, I like to try and commission. I'm one of these people who likes to take money off the university and give it away, do it a lot. And so one of the things that I did a while back was to, we screened a film in a community setting, and people in the community said to us, that's great, but what about our community science? And I was like, oh, your community science, what is that? And so we just commissioned some very small pilots that would enable people to come up with their community science projects, and having no idea what they would come up with necessarily. But so one of the projects that came out of that was engaging scientists who work on climate change with refugees and asylum seekers who were witnessing climate change and could talk about the impact of it in where they had come from. And so that project was an incredible exchange between those people. And so I kind of almost don't specify it, just offer an opportunity, if you like. And then people will always surprise you with what they come up with. So I guess my thing is to say, don't be too prescriptive, but often a small amount of money or a small amount of resource can really unlock that. So one of the things that was great about this design challenge was, and you have to encourage and nurture and say to people, this is for you if you want to get involved. So there was one lady who's an artist, and she runs a code club for disabled people, and she wasn't sure that this was for her. And so for me, her coming along, that's a brilliant opportunity for me to follow up and say, okay, what can we do to support you to get involved in the project in the ways that you'd like to? And she can say, right, we're doing this event, and we're going to do this. I'm like, great, I can help you to write an application for funding or whatever it is, or letter of support. Not being prescriptive about what people want, but just having that conversation which unlocks what those needs are. So it's not really a straightforward answer, but it's being interested, if you like. I held another of those projects where the whole of the engineering department in University of Manchester wanted to engage with the BME community and say, why are you not interested in what we're doing? And actually, out of a meeting over lunch, people just said, do you know what, if you want to find out what we're interested in, come along to an event. And that was the start of a relationship of the scientists being interested in that community, in where they were. So I always think, how can I get to people kind of where they are, whether that's in their homes. If I could do one next project, I don't know how to do it, is thinking about that homeless challenge of people that aren't reached by support services. So that is a very sensitive issue, if you like, but there are some incredible things that can just start with a very small exchange, and it's being open to the possibility.
Great, thank you. I think over here.
It's going to sound ridiculous, but you've just answered the question.
All right, cool. Sometimes it's just giving an ear and listening to someone. One of the most wonderful things that happened to me, I taught script. I always change direction every 4 years or so. It's getting a bit less now. But I used to work in the film industry and I got really bored and burned out by it and came back to Manchester and met with a community organisation that works with refugees and asylum seekers. And I said, I'd love to be able to do something with script writing and to do some kind of course or something. And they said, yeah, great, why don't you do a 12-week script writing course? And it was absolutely incredible. 12 years later, I went along to a showcase where this organisation was showcasing their latest talent. And one of the people on the course had been training other people up to do filmmaking and script writing, and we made a film and stuff. And he said, I remember this was because I went on your course. I'm like, wow. That's like 12 years later. So it's that thing of being interested, and so kind of coming back to people and seeing what they're up to. So it's kind of thinking long term, not just short term.
I think over there.
I'm interested in the politics. Particularly was interested in your comments about middle class, people with disposable income and disposable time to participate in that can therefore drive a particular agenda.
Mm-hmm.
But actually the question I really wanted to ask you about was to do with the limits to citizen science. I would think trying to find a repository for nuclear waste in this country is very difficult. It's a very complex topic. Trying to find a place to put nuclear waste. It's been happening. We've been trying to decide on it for over 30 years now. We make the waste, but we have no way to put it. And it seems to me difficult to imagine citizen participation in a project like that, because quite naturally every citizen is going to simply say, well, not in my backyard.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it feels to me as if there are limits to that participation when you have extremely complex decision making. And perhaps unpopular, politically charged decision-making when it's not just counting stars in the galaxy.
Yeah. So what is spectacular failure on that particular initiative, if you like? What is it that's failing?
In the context of the nuclear waste, what's failing? I think what's failing is people's understanding of the complexity inherent in that decision-making process.
So just from hearing you speak, I want to know more. And I would imagine that other people would want to know more, because when we start doing things on people's doorsteps, then suddenly it becomes a kind of personal challenge. And very often, I think the thing about the middle class thing and this are very connected, in that middle class people to be very good at getting on top of that issue and saying not on our doorstep. But often people from other classes that are not educated wouldn't necessarily be thinking about those. They may be thinking about those things, but might not be able to negotiate that it doesn't happen on their doorstep or doesn't happen where they are. So those things for me are kind of interconnected, and just airing of that conversation I think is absolutely important, because people might not be thinking about it. And as citizens, I think we have a responsibility to try and understand these issues and to feed into the policy behind that, because those amateur eyes will think about and see things at that grassroots, ground level that the policymakers won't think about and won't feel the impact of their policies. I mean, thinking about the Tory government as a kind of case in point, not feeling that, imagining that if you do these things to the health service and cut it here, people will be innovative and they'll come up with ways to be enterprising about how to deliver the health service. If that's not happening, and actually people are getting worried about calling the doctors on weekend because they don't think the doctors are going to be there, there's something about what your policy actually feels like to people on the ground. So I think it's important that we engage as citizens and have that opportunity to have that conversation, however complex it is, because when we look at the problem from all these different perspectives, we get a better sense of the problem. So I don't have the answer, but I think you're unearthing something that really needs to be talked about. And whether that's that we come up with a solution or a solution that's good enough, there's something about talking through that potential solution and maybe thinking a bit laterally. Thanks for that.
Okay.
You said you felt we needed a new notion of ownership, I think in the context of data. Could you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, so I think, so in the same way that I might create something, as I think that thing that I created, my body, it's my body, if data's being recorded of my heartbeat, my blood samples, I believe that I own that. But often, people don't have access to that data. So if we could rethink ownership in terms of, you know, if we were to rethink that the things like water and sunlight and energy and all of those things are kind of commonly owned, if you like, no one really should own them, it makes us think about how we then protect those resources. It makes you think more, if you believe that your data and your body's your body, it might make you think more about how you would kind of self-care for your body, and not that someone at a hospital or a doctor is the person or the expert who's going to tell you how to do what you need to do. You still need to collaborate with them, but I think there's a different way to open up thinking about whose data it is. You know, the whole care.data thing in England, and trying to have it that our medical records be sold off to private companies, and the public kind of kicked back on that. They kicked back on it because they don't trust insurers and private companies to own that data. So there's something very important there in thinking about who owns that data. If it's our data and it's managed by us, there's that possibility of thinking through when we give it away and who we give it away to. Because there's all kinds of privacy issues that will come up, you know, just with Facebook. If I put that I'm going to Edinburgh and people know that I'm away from home, they can look up my address. So suddenly data becomes a way to kind of survey people and look at surveillance, but also to make money and make a profit off people. So, you know, if you think about the situation in America with their healthcare system, which is private, you know, people make money off the fact that you've got kind of bad health. And so there's ways that people can make profit, but it's not the people who own it. So that for me, there's a challenge there in thinking about who owns the data. Does that answer your question?
Well, there's a difference between data which is personal, which discloses stuff about me, which I may or may not want to share because there may be benefit in sharing it. And that's different from other kind of data I might collect, say about pollution in the environment, which I think arguably should just be open data. And so the personal data is more tricky. How do you manage access to it, still maintain some control, but get benefit for community?
So I guess part of it's about anonymising it, but also I think that your personal data and the environmental data, I think they're intrinsically linked. So if you live in a city, your health is going to be different from someone who lives rurally, just because you're probably breathing cleaner air if you're living in the countryside. So when you have access to these different data sets, I talk about innovative communication, not really very well, but there's ways to visualise and see, okay, where do I live and how might that impact on my health? People do it when they buy their houses. They'll look to see, okay, you know, where's the nearest local school, how good is it, that kind of stuff. But people can also do that with thinking about the environment and their own health. It's why middle class people move out to the suburbs. And other people are kind of stuck living where they're living in the winds rowing in a particular direction, the factories are all around them. So it's kind of thinking about, if people get hold of ways to look at that data themselves, what does that then enable you or not enable you to do? So I think they're all connected. It's about how we can pull together stories from that data that tells us something about ourselves and our environment. So I think all citizen science projects should somehow give back something that enables the individual that participated to learn something about themselves.
It's making data available and also, but is different from being able to interpret it and facilitating that interpretation.
So I would say that extreme citizen science end, where you work with people to analyse the data together, and you're teaching and learning the ways in which you analyse it, can be part of that citizen science process. It's a very there's ways to do it. You do it through playing games or puzzles or so forth that enables us to be able to recognise things without having to analyse the data ourselves. But I think it's an important part of the process. It's kind of missing out the biggest learning opportunity by not involving that bit in looking at the data. And also that one of the things I forgot to mention is with citizen science projects that are about the environment, people start to care about the data when they collect it in the way that perhaps, I think scientists do as well, but when you start to see the data yourself and you start to understand, we're losing these species and these, flowering is happening earlier or later, all of that kind of stuff, people start caring about it, and then when they care about it, they want to do something about it. And so that next step's what can we do? Citizenship starts to happen. So I think they're intrinsically linked. I wouldn't want it that the data just kind of sits there on a shelf and goes into an academic paper. We need to care about the data.
Yeah, I was really interested in your title, which is for community development, and I suppose citizen science for answering scientific research questions is quite clear what you do and how you address those questions, but for community development seems to be much more kind of almost like it happens in the course of the project. So you don't have to necessarily start at the beginning and saying, I'm going to do this for community development, but it seems to be something that is kind of a little bit more sort of emerges from the process itself.
Yeah, exactly.
So then how can you make sure it actually is for community development? So it's less clear when it's a successful outcome than it is for scientific research.
So for some people, it might be as simple as on a mapping project that was mapping spaces to grow land, one successful outcome for one resident was that they came and met some new people and they ate soup with them and they made friends in their local area. I couldn't say that I can imagine that might happen. You can't always expect that these things happen, but by kind of bringing people together, those kinds of things kind of tend to happen.
Thank you very much. What sort of lessons do you think that a museum like this can draw from both the kind of citizen science and the crowdsourcing around culture to how they interact with the population on their key mission?
Yeah. So one of the interesting things about working with the Science Museum Group and the Museum of Science Industry in Manchester was that I felt the museum has kind of more resources and knows how to work with an audience and to make that experience a learning experience for some people. Often that experience might be targeted to particular audiences, which can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing. So one of the things for me, I did a project called Hooked on Music. It was all about music and what makes it catchy. It was a game, it was an app. I could see that as soon as we made this app, it would not be accessible to certain people. So I actually, with my niece and nephew in Edinburgh, who were at the time, they were probably like 5 and 3, I think, and I said to them, I was trying to say, this project's not going to be for you, how could we find a way into it? And we ended up making a Harlem Shake video, and they call it Sheepy Harlem Shake. And in the making of that video, I could see, and they could see, their way into this project about music, and then I could show that video to the Science FRSA director, and she'd go, right, great, we need to do something for kids, and it's going to be this performance thing, and it'll be a show, explainers, da-da-da. So then it's kind of thinking about, you probably do it naturally, you segment your audience, but you can segment these kinds of projects that can be about, in that example, working with young people was crowdsourcing the playlist, for example, and so kind of just playing music and tunes, and there was lots of dancing, and some of the science came across, and CBeebies got involved. So it's kind of thinking about what are those partnerships that you might be able to develop because you're good at doing partnership working, whether it's with researchers or, broadcasters. Other lessons from that, I guess, so the great thing with Museum of Science Industry is that they up-fronted costs to do that project. So the project, often these projects, and I work like this now and it feels a little bit crazy when I do it, but usually there's no money to do these projects because people think, why are you doing that? But if you hold a public event at a festival and you launch it, people get excited and they go, I want to be part of that. So Siemens, who's sponsoring the Robot Orchestra, they came along to the launch event at the University of Science, and they were like, we want to do that project, and they were just like, here's some money, and here's our support, and here's some kind of technology stuff that you can do stuff with. So it's that thing about building those assets, and I think museums are good at doing that and providing a platform for it, but also testing stuff with audiences before it goes out there. So yeah, being able to almost almost pitch that proposal to funders and get people involved who want to do it, because you have access to huge audiences.
Great. Okay, there's one more.
How would you suggest overcoming this barrier between those that are professional, for example, professional ecologists, and those that have small niche projects and have in-depth knowledge that the professionals or those that have an academic degree have? What would you suggest as routes of overcoming to get your data accepted?
You mean accepted for?
Just accepted out
Oh,
into
into
an environment.
So I think there's a great paper out there, I can't remember who wrote it, but it's about using citizen science as resistance to kind of doing stuff with scientists gets your data validated, and data collected with experts is usually more valid than data that's not. But you can use the crowd to help validate the data. So if you look at the data and have it checked and checked and checked and checked, that's a mechanism to enable that to make it more valid than perhaps not. But it's not always about just the data. Sometimes it's about that process that goes around collecting the data. So just the thing of collecting the data and then going to, I don't know, whether it's your local neighbourhood watch people or someone else, or your local residents group or whatever it is, just that thing about going out, noticing and observing is something that can, it's a well-being thing to be going out and walking and noticing things in your environment, but also when you have that data and you've analysed it and you've got the possibility to put it across to somebody, I think that's just a powerful thing to be able to have a conversation about it. And that is often the thing that makes change happen. It's not your research paper that is behind a paywall that makes change happen. It's having a conversation with somebody who's in a position to make the changes happen. Or you can make the changes happen yourself if it's within your control. So usually involving, I think there's lots of people like yourself out there who do research for the university, but also...
No, I'm not university, I'm the non-academic.
Oh, you're the non-academic,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think there are people out there who have skills and expertise that in working with communities, that perhaps as a researcher who's always coming in wanting to do stuff with the community that is for their research purposes, there's more trust on the side of being on that community side, because you're part of it, so you'll care more about it. But you can be a broker between, if you're wanting to find research expertise to get involved and help negotiate that. So I do that quite often. I work on an arts project in Yorkshire. Mary was saying to me, remember, your fellowship's ended, how do you earn a living? And I just go back to being freelance again, but an arts organisation in North Yorkshire trying to get people involved in the arts in areas of low participation said, you're doing this citizen science thing, we're doing something participatory but with arts. Could we learn from you and you could be our critical friend? And some of the things I've done is to help negotiate their relationship with a university who'll come and help do their impact work. Because the organisation knows what they want, but they don't necessarily know how to put it across, so we work together to come up with that, and then negotiate with the university about how much that will cost and their time and things like that. So perhaps there's a bit of a brokering role if you do want to involve experts. And Heather, who's at the Edinburgh Beltane, can probably help you connect with researchers, because that's one of the things that she does in her job. It's finding the right researchers who come with the right attitude. So it was great when Danielle on the engineering project said to me, I don't really care what people's skills are, their disciplines, they have to come with the right attitude. And so I'm thinking, okay, we'll create an environment that people will have the right attitude. So, and do you know what? You can get money out of training them. On the Lancaster project, the Autism Society that we work with, the Signpost, the homeless organisation, one of the really important things was to train the researchers before they could come in and do anything. So you can make a bit of an income stream out of training the researchers.
Great, I think that last one maybe.
I was wondering, I read about this project in Scotland that you paid £200, you gave them some of your DNA and they would give you your ancestors' information, and they will also increase their database. Do you think that could be sort of citizen science or more like corporate approach?
So I guess it's that mutual benefit thing again. What is it me, for example, I would think, well, I'd want to have a conversation with someone about that, about those results. So do they include that as part of their service? Because once you get certain data back about your genetic makeup, also how do you interpret it? So they might tell you, okay, you carry these genes that have implications for Alzheimer's, actually that you're going to go around thinking about these things, and we'll think, oh my goodness. And then you start having conversations with your family, or you might not have conversations with your family, but it makes you think about, do I actually want to do that or not? So what do you do once you know these things? How do you put the genie back in the bottle? And so I would kind of put it, are there people out there who are doing it with these other elements around it, where you're learning something, you can have a chat with somebody, they're not selling off your data to drug companies and so on. You know, what are the things that you care about? What do you value above other things in finding something out about your DNA? You don't need to answer it now, but there might be ways in which you can get access to that you wouldn't have to pay a company that you're not sure about their reputation and so on.
Okay, well that's probably quite a good thought-provoking point to finish. I'd like, you answered all the questions very thoroughly and been very interactive, and thanks to everybody in the audience for participating and enjoying the journey with Erinma. So thank you again.